Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Sandino Gomez. Shout out to Professor Kinberg for hopefully watching this video. Let me know what you think. And anyone else who might be watching, if you're curious who Sandino Gomez is as a critical thinker, well, I'm here to tell you um, just a bit about myself and sort of how I apply my experiences and my knowledge when it comes to critical thinking and like my role as a teacher, how I see myself as a teacher, and what role critical thinking plays in how I interact with people in my profession, my students, their parents, my colleagues, etc. So first off, me personally, um, I'm named after the most famous Latin American revolutionary that you've never heard of, as I like to say. Augusto Cesar Sandino was a Nicaraguan revolutionary anti-imperialist who in the 1920s and 30s led a group of Nicaraguan compatriots against the U.S. Marines who were occupying his country on behalf of U.S. based interests, business interests, and yeah, I mean, Augusto Cesar Sandino was an incredibly successful guerrilla fighter. People like Ho Chi Minh and Che Guevara talked about how they studied his tactics to overcome the Americans. And Augusto Cesar Sandino wrote about how he studied the Americans and the way they beat the British. So it's kind of this cool lineage of revolutionary fighting between, the oppressors and the oppressed. And funny how revolution can often mean that those things, who was once the oppressed becomes the oppressor, right? Anyway, I didn't know all this history when I was a young person. My father always told me I was named after a great man, but I didn't understand who Augusto Cesar Sandino was, who he was, or what he did, or what role he played in Nicaraguan history or my own country's history, right? And so I didn't know or understand my name growing up, and it was sort of I had a whole bunch of issues which you can read about in my introduction to this class if you'd like. But I struggled a lot with like racism and classism and a lot of identity issues being a young brown man, a young brown student in a predominantly white school in a predominantly white town. I felt like I had a lot of instances that taught me to think critically about race, racism, class, wealth, homophobia and sexuality and all these different things that I experienced that helped me get a certain perspective on like how I wanted to think about the world. And that perspective ended up becoming really like a social justice lens. I consider myself a community organizer. I'm an activist. I'm someone who has dedicated a large part of his life and career and work professionally and personally towards, dismantling systems of oppression, standing up for the oppressed, doing what I can to try and create what I would consider a better world. One of the things they say about history is if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, we've got some really messed up history that I don't have no interest in repeating. And so part of what I see my role as now is someone who can use my privilege, use my experiences, use my knowledge and what I've gained through my life to help other people hopefully do the same. So a community organizer. I spent a long time working in the community where I now teach as a member of the Watsonville Brown Berets. I was a member of an underground pirate radio station for a long time. I worked for a local peace and justice center called the Resource Center for Nonviolence. That was like my professional work for almost a decade of my life in my 20s and 30s. And so, the activist and organizer identity is key to who I am, both as a person as well as a critical thinker, because I think critical thinking is essential if you're going to be organizing and if you're going to be taking actions to dismantle systems of oppression. You better understand those systems. You better think critically about them so that you can then use that knowledge and use that insight as a tool to help you better achieve your goals. So, who am I as a critical thinker? I think that's really like, I'm a community organizer and I'm someone who is not a victim of all these social forces. I'm a survivor of them and I'm stronger because of them. And I want to make sure that, again, a lot of people don't have to go through the same stuff that I had to go through in order to get where I am today. So, how does all this social justice, legacy, activism, everything coordinate with my life? Well, I should say my life as a teacher. I see myself as an advocate for my students. I had some really amazing teachers who were advocates for me when I was a student, and I want to be able to pay that forward and be an advocate for a lot of my students and an ally with my students. You know, I of course have this role as the teacher and as the role model, but at the same time, I want to be an ally and an advocate for them and their causes and their issues. So, part of what I'm exploring in my research question is how do students, I should say, back up, how do I, as a teacher, teach history in a way that's relevant to students' lived experiences and lives today, with the ultimate goal of hoping that they might then take some action regarding those things. Right now at my school, there's been an awesome upswell of student organizing and activism regarding school resource officers and whether the school district should have police officers on campus at our school. Um, it's been really inspiring to watch students identify this issue, you know, and decide that this is something that they really wanted to work on. And they've conducted surveys with students and teachers, parents. They've gone to school board meetings, well, I should say digitally, gone to school board meetings and presented to the school board, arguing why they felt that, you know, the money that we pay to school resource officers every year in our district, I think like 450K it was that goes every year to school resource officers at three of the schools in our district, how that money could be used differently to support student needs. And to my district's credit, they've recently decided to um, discontinue the school resource officer program and rededicate that money to counselors, both social and emotional, as well as academic counselors. So, you know, my students have identified their own problem and have taken action to create a different reality around them, right? The problem was school resource officers, students decided the solution was not having them on campus anymore. And, you know, this is really cool in the context of the larger protests that are occurring right now all across the country with, you know, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and all the other different, you know, people who have suffered under police brutality and systematic racism and oppression. So, it's a really cool way here locally that I see my students thinking critically. And, you know, my role as an educator is not to tell them what to do, but to rather, I think, support them in their efforts when they do what they want to do. You know, I'm an advisor, I'm an ally, I'm an advocate, but I'm not out there on the front lines anymore by any means telling students what to do. That's not my role anymore. I'm there to support them and to assist them when I can, using my knowledge and wealth of experiences as best I can to help them do what they want to do. So, you know, I see myself as a critical thinker in my classroom, really wanting to create safe spaces for student learning. And that means that I don't tolerate, and I make it explicitly clear at the beginning of the year, I don't tolerate racism, misogyny, sexism, homophobia, classism, ableism. Any kinds of forms of discrimination are basically unwelcome in my classroom. And that's because I know how harmful and damaging they can be, both in my own life experiences as well as the experiences of my friends and family. And, you know, the whole wealth of research that shows the negative impacts these social forces have on student achievement and participation in school. So I'm trying to create an environment in my school or in my classroom where critical thinking can occur and that no one's going to be heckled or molested or harassed or bullied for thinking critically, for taking a risk, for thinking out loud, for trying their best to understand a topic and maybe struggling or otherwise like um, not maybe getting it right off the bat. And so, you know, I tell my students this world really often tears you down. And in my classroom, I want to create an environment where we can build each other up. And by doing so, I think I'm able to, you know, think critically about my own classroom environment, but also encourage my students to think critically about how they interact with each other and how they treat each other. So, yeah, I mean, how do I see, how does, you know, me as a critical thinker impact my role as a teacher? I think another way is like all of, like I really enjoy this work. I just completed my first year teaching and I really enjoyed being in the classroom, working with young people, having amazing conversations about American history, U.S. government, economics. I've really appreciated the insights that my students bring to the lessons and to the projects and the work that we do. And I really have found that I enjoy being not just a teacher but also a role model and a mentor, and that um, by demonstrating critical thinking in my classroom, I'm trying to encourage them to think critically about the world around them. And seeing students organize around this issue of police on campuses has been really inspiring to me, because I think that's um, a great example of the problem posing suggestion or pedagogy written about by Paulo Freire in his work. So yeah, that's kind of how I see critical thinking impacting me as a teacher. Critical thinking helps make me an activist and organizer, and then I'm trying to bring some of those lessons and philosophies into my classroom to help my students with. Um, Final question: how does or how will your image of yourself as a teacher influence your interactions with others? I think respectful communication. I think just right off the bat, just like being a respectful communicator, being an effective communicator, not being afraid to communicate, not being afraid of conflict, but rather looking to have like productive conflict and looking to how I can bring my critical thinking skills to resolve issues that I might have, or communications I need to have with my students, with their parents, with my colleagues. As I work with my students, I want to be helpful, I want to be understanding, I want to be an advocate, I want to be someone who can help them succeed. I do not like giving out F's. I don't want to make my students' lives harder than they already are. And so, when I'm able to see a student succeed, there's nothing that fills my heart with greater joy than that. And seeing a student like embrace history or embrace, economics or government or politics, whatever it might be, that's its own reward. So, I'm hoping that, again, being a critical thinker will help them think critically about their own lives and think critically about being successful. What do they have to do to be successful in my classroom, in their school, and in their lives? Because this is a skill that goes beyond the topic of history. This is something that could serve them well throughout their whole life. So trying to get them started now so that they can be able to do that later. With my parents, trying to again, be respectful and communicative with them as much as possible, and try and reach out. I did try whenever possible to reach out to parents of students who were having problems in my class, whether they were academic or social. Thankfully, there weren't a lot of social problems that happened in my class, but there were some academic ones. And reaching out to parents and communicating with parents, it's like, it's a way of, again, problem posing, right? I pose the problem to the parent, like, hey, we have this problem with your student, and like, let's get together and think critically about how we can create more supports or a better environment for that student to succeed in my classroom, which is always tricky. And finally, I think just like with my colleagues, like I'm just really going in with that beginner's mind. I'm a new teacher. I'm working with teachers who've been around for like 5, 10, 20, 30 years. There's so much wealth of knowledge that I can yang from them. So I'm really trying to approach my colleagues as potential teachers. Yes, we're peers. We've both gotten through the education system to become teachers. We've, done our CBEST and CSETs and TPAs and everything else that we need to do in order to become teachers. But at the same time, their experiences as teachers far outweigh mine, and I'm trying to get everything I can learn from them through those experiences. So I think for me, how, as a critical thinker, how do I interact with my colleagues? Like, I'm thinking, like, what knowledge can I gain from these people? How can I take the benefits of their experiences and apply them to like my life and my classroom and my work in my school? So, yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of conclude, I think critical thinking is an essential skill. It's an excellent skill for a teacher to have. It's an excellent skill for a teacher to teach their students. And I'm doing my best as an educator to kind of balance the different roles I have to play as a teacher, as an ally and an advocate, as a critical thinker, as an employee, as someone who works for, the state of California essentially, and doing my best to ensure that all my students receive a top quality education in my classroom and feel safe and respected, and like what they have to say matters in my classroom. So, you know, viva la causa. I mean, like, let the revolution begin. That being said, I do really believe in constructive works. Gandhi had a whole program around creating constructive works. It's not enough to just say no and to tear things down. You need to struggle and work with how to build things up. So, I'm really working on how to create an education system that supports young people and sees them succeed in my classroom. And that takes a lot of critical thinking to make happen. So again, I just think critical thinking is crucial as a skill to have in my profession, and I'm looking forward to exploring it further, both in this class and as I begin my second year of teaching, which is incredible. I'm stoked. I can't believe it. I did it. Ah! Anyway, I hope this isn't too long. I ramble a lot. I like to talk. Um, Check out YouTube and look up my name and community television of Santa Cruz County, and you'll find all kinds of wealth of television shows I've done over the years as a moderator for Voices from the Village, community TV's longest running public affairs talk program. So yeah, media activist. Love it. Love creating my own media. It's not enough to be against the media. You gotta become the media and make your own media in this modern world. So that's what I'm doing right here. I'm talking about my thoughts on critical thinking with you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Hopefully. I don't know how many people are actually going to watch this video, but thank you for your time and attention. Sandino Gomez, teacher, hopefully extraordinaire. Peace out.